Alrighty guys, welcome back to another one. We're doing something a little bit different today. We're not breaking down any 12 gauge shells. This time we're doing a 10 gauge slug. This is Federal's Magnum Rifled Hollow Point Slug. You can see the price I paid for them right here. These actually are not all that expensive in the grand scheme of things, even though it's a lot more than 12 gauge slugs. But this is a 3.5 inch 10 gauge hollow point slug, 1 3/4 ounces, with an advertised velocity of 1,280 feet per second. Now, out of my 36-inch barrel H&R, we're getting closer to 1,400. That is a lot more than 1280, but you would expect that with that huge 36-inch barrel. We haven't chronographed any of these out of my 23-inch barrel or either of the two 28-inch barrels I have, but I would expect that they might be moving around 1280. Out of that 23-inch barrel, they're probably moving closer to 1200. But that's for future us to find out. Here's what the actual round looks like. Federal 10 gauge has always been brown as far as I know. It's actually a pretty cool looking hull. 3.5 inch. Never seemed so big. But here's what the slug looks like when it's loaded into the shell. You can see the hollow point cavity, and Ballistic Products actually sells this exact slug that Federal makes and uses in their factory slug here. It is the value slug, 1 3/4 ounce 10 gauge value slug through Ballistic Products. And I actually have some of those, and right here we fired a few of these in the past, just so you know. But these right here is the exact same slug from Ballistic Products loaded into Remington hulls. And I can tell you right now, these are loaded substantially hotter than Federal's advertised velocity of 1280. These are moving over 1500 FPS out of my 28-inch Browning. So I think the reason why Federal downloads these, because this is actually fairly weak for a 10 gauge slug, is for use in older guns that can't handle a ton of pressure and a lot of recoil. These actually kick very, very mildly for a 10 gauge slug. And to make that more understandable here, this is a lot less recoil than a 2 3/4 inch slug out of a lightweight 12 gauge. Let's say a 12 gauge single shot. H&R partner, NEF partner, H&R topper is what I meant to say there. But those kick a lot harder than this 3.5 inch 10 gauge slug here, simply due to the 10 gauges weighing upwards of 12 pounds, depending on model. It eats up all of the recoil. These are actually very soft shooting. Let's get you a good view of the box here. It's nothing special. It's pretty much the same as all Federal blue box slugs are. Just a bunch of warnings. Keep out of reach of children, stuff like that. This is the specs for the loading. Yeah, nothing special here. If you want to read any of that, just pause it. I guess without further ado, let's break one of these open and see how they're loaded. And if you're wondering what this mess in the background here is, I've been melting down some lead to make some more buckshot and stuff. I don't have much. Supply has been very hard to get. And I did break a drill bit, as you can see. But let's cut this up. Well guys, I did something I didn't mean to do. No, it's not the nick in the slug. I meant to just cut the roll off. That way I could reuse this hull, but I did a cutaway instead. Oh well. But this is loaded with a plastic gas seal and 1 1/4 inches of felt wadding. And then we have the slug. There is no spacer underneath that slug to prevent the felt wad from being jammed up into it. Although, these felt wads right here are very, very tough, like rock hard. Like, I can't really press my thumbnail into it very well at all. So, at least the chance of that happening is minimal. So, once again, the powder in here, it looks like it could be Alliance steel, but probably isn't. It just looks identical to Alliance steel, and I'll just leave it at that. We have a plastic gas seal. This one is symmetrical, just like the X10Xs are, but this is obviously not an X10X gas seal. 2 felt wads. You can see the left one right here is actually a little bit taller than the right one. Looks to be about an 1/8 inch taller. but I did measure it and it comes out right to 1.25 inches. Here is the Slug. That is a very tall Foster slug. It's in pretty good condition. It's a little bit oxidized, but I think overall Federal slugs look better in terms of condition they're in than other brands do. It's not perfect, but it's not bad. It's not all mushy and deformed. It looks like we have 34 grains. The wind picked up just now, that's why it changed. But 34 grains of a powder that appears to be Alliance steel, although again, it probably isn't. So that's pretty typical there. That charge of Alliance steel would make sense to push a 1 3/4 ounce load at 1280. That's pretty low speed, but it is what it is. And this hull is, of course, paper base wad, just like all Federal 10 gauge hulls are, and a 209A primer. I really wish Federal would move to plastic base wads and 10 gauge hulls just to make them a little bit more modern. But that's fine for what they are. These last about 8 loadings, although we have gotten well over 12 out of them before. So I believe 1 3/4 ounces is right around 766 grains, but let's see here. We have 765.6. I did remember right. Basically 766 grains. Now, if we roll that over to ounces, we have 1.749. That is right at 1 3/4 ounces. So, they are not lying about how much their slug weighs, unlike some other brands that we have opened up have. Gee, I hope that made sense. It probably didn't. I do actually happen to have some Federal 10 gauge new primed hulls. I pulled this one right out of the bag, and it has a defect in it. Right there. But yeah, paper base wad. The defect's a little weird, but that's fine. We'll use it anyway. It's not going to affect anything. 34 grains of whatever this powder is. Probably some proprietary blend that we'll never know. I spilled a little bit. That's fine. Let's see. We need our plastic gas seal. Doing this with one hand's a little challenging, but it is in place. Our felt wads, doesn't really matter which order these go in, but get those down in place. And then our slug, and if I was smart, I'd put a nitro card over that, but I ain't worried about it. I'm going to keep it the same as Federal had it loaded. Oh, one more thing, if you guys don't know, these slugs are not actually true 10 gauge slugs. They are 747 diameter, closer to 11 gauge than 10 gauge. You actually need a full or improved modified choke for these to be accurate. At least we've come to find out. Through a cylinder bore, these didn't do worth a darn at 42 yards. Told you guys that hull would roll back up just fine. Now it isn't perfect. As you can see, I used a GOT BN2 to do this, and normally I don't like using GOT BN2s or the entire BN series to actually roll crimp. They're more of a crimp finisher, a fold crimp finisher. If you use them to roll crimp, it's going to basically roast the end of your hulls whenever you shoot them. They will almost always require trimming, which is fine. I do load 3-inch, 2 7/8, or 2 3/4 inch 10 gauge, sometimes even 2.5 inch. But 3.5 inch is obviously my favorite. And I also did mangle the end of the slug just a little bit, but it's fine. This will still shoot. Well guys, I guess that's going to end this video here. I appreciate you watching. Let us know what you want to see us do next with this series. We have all kinds of stuff. We can get pretty much anything. Just let us know. But yeah, thanks guys. We'll see you in the next one.